Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sarah Pentecost with APA Virginia staff. Thank you for joining us for our monthly webinar series, Your Hour with APA Virginia, sponsored by the Berkeley Group. Before we get started, I have just a few announcements from the chapter. We're excited that registration is now open for Lynchburg Symposium happening on Monday, April 9th in downtown Lynchburg. We're also excited to announce Evelyn Sloan of Hill Studio as the keynote speaker on downtown revitalization. Stay tuned for more announcements coming soon on more speakers and the program at apavirginia.com. And we hope that you'll join us this year. We're also pleased to announce the 2018 annual conference Mountains of Influence at Wintergreen Resort on July 22nd through the 25th. The call for proposals has ended, but the call for award nominations is now open. So you can also visit apavirginia.com to see this year's categories and how to nominate someone you know. And also, if you're interested in being on the awards nomination committee, there's an email address on our website that you can get involved. And for those who just signed on, thank you for joining us for the monthly webinar series, Your Hour with APA Virginia, sponsored by the Berkeley Group. Thank you to everyone who shares this with your colleagues and helps spread the word about the series. It is free and open to anyone. You don't have to be a member. If you are a member and you're watching this live, you can get 1 CM credit. And our webinars are the fourth Monday of each month from noon to 1 p.m. Please mark your calendars for next month's webinar on March 26th. We'll have the editors of Island Press's new book, Suburban Remix, editors Jason Besky and David Dixon, and panelist Sarah Woodworth. And you can also visit apavirginia.com/webinars to sign up, and there's a special discount code for the paperback version of the book. Today we have Gary McTall, co-founder of GovSense, and Paul Cammisa, CEO of InnoVergent, and they're presenting how to recession-proof your organization, do more with less as an SOP. Feel free to type questions in the box as we go along. Gary and Paul will also take questions at the end, and we will post this to our YouTube page within 24 hours. I'll now go ahead and hand it over to Paul and Gary.
Great, thanks, Sarah. We really appreciate it, and thanks so much to everyone taking, maybe your lunch break here to spend an hour with us. We hope that it's really engaging. If you have questions, feel free to enter them into the question section of the GoToWebinar, and Paul and I will try to respond as we're going through this presentation jointly. If not, we can go to questions at the end. So a little bit about our agenda today. Primarily, we want to focus on some key things about, how to overcome challenges regarding recession-proofing your department or organization. But before we get into that, we really want to, get into some introductions, a little brief section of company background, who we are, and why we're speaking to you regarding this. A little bit of analysis on something that's near and dear to my heart, as I've been consulting local government for a long time. And saw kind of the beginning, middle, and end of the Great Recession and the impact on small, medium, and large communities. We'll talk about the current state of many organizations we see both on the GovSense side and the InnoVergent side, and then really drill down into the how. How can we overcome these challenges, proven plans, and what we can share with you. Not only on this webinar, but afterwards, content and help you out with that. So a little bit about us. So my name is Gary McTall. I'm the co-founder of GovSense. Essentially, I spent 7 years consulting cities and counties from Alaska to Abu Dhabi, everywhere in between. For those on the webinar, it's kind of communities of all sizes and scale. So as small as Smith County, Virginia, up to Arlington, Virginia, over many, many years. And I think that as an organization, we really want to provide 21st century solutions to our clients and the constituents they serve. And so this is always a hot topic is, what kind of operating procedures, standard operating procedures can we implement to kind of recession-proof our department and stop the next, opportunity for change. And so, that's kind of what's really big to me. And Paul, I'll let you introduce yourself as well.
Sure. So good afternoon, everybody. And again, thanks to you for taking the time during your lunch break today to spend some time with us. Again, as Gary said, my name's Paul Cammisa, and I'm the founder and CEO of an organization called InnoVergent. And I personally have over 30 years of helping organizations with their operational excellence across a multitude of different disciplines within the organization. But more recently, I came from a lot of the big ERP type solutions back in the day, the SAPs of the world and whatnot. But I have 14 years of cloud-based only solutions, working with various organizations, whether they be software or any sort of professional services firms, of which the A&E space is one of those areas. So it's something that's near and dear to my heart, and the cloud is something that I guess was an early adopter to back in the day, when it wasn't really called cloud computing, it was still software as a service. So again, we're just really delighted to be here, and looking forward to a good conversation today.
Great, thanks, Paul. And then a little bit about each of our companies. So on the InnoVergent side, I'll let you kind of continue there, Paul, and give a quick background on InnoVergent.
Yeah, so we founded the company in 2006. We're based out of the greater Atlanta area down in Georgia. Again, we're only a cloud-based provider of software and solution sets. And our customer focus is predominantly on the service-based organization. So the A&E firms, software companies, professional services. And I define professional services in our world as anybody who exchanges an hour for $1, and of course the non-for-profit organizations as well. So that's what we do. We've got a very dynamic staff. Most of our people come from industry, so which makes us a unique provider in our services, as opposed to learning to be a consultant first and then figuring out what does a professional services organization have to be concerned with.
Yeah, and it kind of really overlaps a lot with what we do on the GovSense side. A lot of communities, whether at the city or county level, special districts, state entities, they may not specifically exchange hours for dollars, and maybe more fixed fee arrangements based off of a fee schedule. But essentially, they're managing services to a community, an organization, or a group of individuals. And so we saw a lot of synergy between InnoVergent and GovSense. Not only on the services side, but of course then the A&E firms, architectural engineering firms, that work with our customers at the municipal level, cities and counties, and even special districts, if you will. So and on the GovSense side, we were founded in 2014 to also be a cloud-based software solution provider to those industries. So let's take a quick jump into the Great Recession and what we know. So coming from the U.S. Census Bureau data and the Brookings Institute, we see some amazing trends that I think that if you were to dig into this or previously, you would see that you can almost kind of see it coming if you have the appropriate data points. And so what do we know about the Great Recession? And if we take a look at revenue from a state tax perspective year over year, we actually see that when we declare the recession started, we actually saw a jump in revenue before we actually saw a decline. And this one, specifically that line in green as it relates to general sales and gross receipts, is one that almost is a 10% net change, which is pretty dramatic. And when even you compare it to post 9/11. And then if we jump in a little bit deeper and we take a look at the cumulative changes in state and local government on their own source receipts. So their own source receipts is essentially all income that a community has collected, that except for federal grants. So we take out the federal grants, we take a look at those receipts, and it was roughly $100 billion from 2007 to 2009 that we saw a drop. And when you compare that to the 3 previous recessions, it was such a drastic change, that one that had never been seen, in modern times. And so, we got to keep thinking of these images and these graphs as we go through the presentation today on how drastic of a shift it really was, and how do we prevent that in the future. And then this one is really interesting because what this graph essentially has told us that that even if the federal government steps in with grants to aid the impact of the recession, it takes over 4 years for that to normalize, and it took over 2 years to actually see a net positive change in impact at the local government level. So you'll see here is that red bar in the middle is post impact from or the net change essentially when the federal aid came in, and we only see that impact really start to adjust it 2.5 to 3 years into the process. So although the federal government is great and is willing to help, sometimes that help takes longer than anticipated to impact the local government level. And then the last part is more on the job losses, and this is the unfortunate part that really hit home for me to see colleagues, friends, co-workers and such that were impacted by this, not in the early days of the recession that a lot of people start to point out, and you'll see in blue there the December 2007 recession, but 2 years, 3 years, 4 years post initiation of the recession, we were still feeling that impact, and it was getting worse from a job loss perspective. And a lot of communities essentially were asked to do more with less. And so with that in mind, we kind of move on to kind of our next step where we get into our kind of comparison of the first graph and the last graph. So the first graph that we showed was the change in revenue year over year, in the big highlights there are 2001 and 2009, and then that change in job losses, unfortunately. And what does this really tell us? And for me, it kind of told me three things. First and foremost is that revenue should not be your only indicator. It's very easy to jump right to revenue and say, okay, this is hard and fast rules. We budgeted X number of dollars. Our revenue minus expenses, is a shortfall or a gain in revenue. That's easy, right? But there's other things that we need to market. We're going to focus on those today. The second is planning and forecasting is key, and planning and budgeting and things like that are important, but forecasting is so much more important. If you can take the raw data and easily transform it, you can really look into a crystal ball. We have customers that we have converted data all the way back to the early 2000s, and then we take that data and show visualization that we're going to show you today. On the GovSense side, we show them that visualization, and if they were running our solution during that recession, as I mentioned, we were founded in 2014, so that wasn't possible, but if they were running our solution at that time, or the tool that they had gave them that visualization, they're like, oh my goodness, I could see that trend. I see it happening. I see what's going on. And so, although it can't prevent the change, I think that really the take home is that data can help you prepare for the impact of year over year declines. And that's really, really important. One of the things we're going to focus on today. So kind of let's jump into our current state, right? So what do we know today? And I think this is important for both the GovSense side as well as the InnoVergent side, so the private sector and public sector. A few things that we know is mainly I would drive towards technology, but the one thing we're seeing faster than anything else before is that customers and constituents' demands are constantly evolving. I mean, I think of the millions of applications that are on app stores and how easy it is to download a free app or a 99-cent app to get a service from a company, from an industry as a whole, an individual, the public sector, anything like that. They can just download that app. And so we're seeing that people and costs and actions are shifting. And so agility is a must. So, being able to be agile and change and get information into people's hands faster and better and more, and it will make them more equipped for, providing the next piece, which is that 360-degree view of whatever you're working on, whether it's a project, it's a, phase of a project, it is, a plot of land, a major subdivision, anything in between, is having all of the data, that 360-degree view at your fingertips to make intelligent decisions, will help you kind of transition from, how technology is going to change the expectations and enable your employees to engage better with other team members and your customers. So when we go out, we hear from prospects and hopefully future customers all the time. We hear kind of two things: what they experience, or what they're experiencing, and what they want to experience. So at the highest level, like I mentioned, is everyone is saying, hey, revenue is our driving factor. We are really reactive as an organization. We can't plan. I don't know that I need a new planner until I figure out at the end of the year what my revenue was for this year. That's not the best decision, because you'll start to see impacts like, we have team members that are either under or overutilized. We have team members that are overcommitting, not intentionally. They're not trying to overpromise to a customer on when they can turn around the plan set or when they can turn around a task, but they don't know the other external factors that are coming down the pike, and so they inherently overcommit, and oftentimes that leads to feeling undervalued, and it caps certain individuals with predefined skill sets, because we're not managing workload by skill set. We're managing workload on demand by kind of like the biggest flag that we need to take care of. But what we're starting to hear prospects really want to say, what they really want when we break it down into really high level, is they say, we really want resource planning. We want to be proactive. We want to know that our employees are utilized, 70%, with these types of plans, and 30% with these types of plans, so that we can make a shift and manage the workload. And really what they want to do is they want to, under-promise and over-deliver. So when a citizen, a customer, a business, or anything comes into a community, they want to make sure they exceed expectations. And so, we think that's really important on the GovSense. Is there anything, Paul, on your side for the private sector that you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, so I would just say, one of the couple of key things that we are hearing is that, everyone in an organization or local government wants to plan. They should be planning, because at a management or an executive level, nobody likes surprises, good, bad, or indifferent. So we want to be as predictive as possible in the future. We're not talking the future 3 or 6 months, but rather maybe 12 months, 24 months, 36 months. So as Gary said, we want to try to get out of that reactive mode and look into that crystal ball and gaze into the future so that we know what's happening. The other thing from a local government perspective, as well as on the private sector for any of the A&E firms that may be on the call today, is that our biggest cost as a group or as an organization is personnel cost. And so we want to be able to understand that if we take on that new project, or if economic development is working super hard and we're bringing on all these new projects that we've got in 2018 or 2019, what kind of headcount do we need? What will be the fiscal impact on our organization if we were to do those types of things? Those are the things that we really need to look at and understand, so that as we go through these different processes of understanding our organization, we're not getting caught flat-footed. So we're being very agile, we're moving people around, and we're making sure that we've got the right people for the right job. So as I always like to say, if you wanted to put a nail into a piece of wood, could you use the back of a screwdriver to nail the nail into the wood? Absolutely. But it's a whole lot easier if you used a hammer. So we want to make sure we've got the right tools for the right job for the right time. And I think that's a really important aspect of what we're seeing in the marketplace today.
Yeah, well said. I completely agree. So if we look at it from a leadership perspective, a few other things that we're starting to notice when we start to compile data across customers in all different locations. The thing that we're starting to hear a lot is leaders, because they've been asked to do more with less due to setbacks from the Great Recession, they're in the trenches with their team, and that's good, but it's really difficult to kind of stand up and take a look over and get that 360-degree view when you're in the weeds. And like I mentioned before, and Paul mentioned as well, is they're very reactive. It's reactive management. And then pick up any management book that they'll tell you that's not always the best type of management for every situation. The next is they're not seeing trends and key performance indicators. How are they measuring success? They're not seeing that. And really the most thing that we see the most is tools are so outdated. You're not given the proper tools, as Paul mentioned, to be successful. And so, what kind of tools can you use? As simple as Excel. We're going to go through that. We're trying to sell you something here. We'll go through and show you how you can use tools like Excel or Office 365 to do a lot of this stuff. But if we break this down from a visual perspective, I personally am a little bit more visual. When we started to, aggregate what we're getting feedback from customers and prospects on across our sales, our operations, our customer support, this is kind of how we quantified it. We see that 20% of leaders are focusing on performance management. 30% of the time they're focusing on reporting and controls. And then 50%, they're spending their time in operations, and meaning that they're in there with the day-to-day tasks and all of that, which is great. And your team probably, supports you 100% with that. But what we really want to encourage communities to do and leaders to do is flip that funnel. So let's focus 50% on performance management, key performance indicators, trends, what's happening in our organization or department, leaving that 30% on reporting and control, because it is super important, and it will feed our 50% on performance management. And then let's get out of the weeds on the operation side. And we think that you can still do more with less resources, but if those resources are converted to technology and process, then you necessarily don't need to add, like Paul mentioned, your highest cost is human capital. You don't need to add, bodies to do this. And we're going to talk about that next. And I think, kind of the real key takeaway, and I hear Paul say this often is, you're working very hard and no one is doubting that, but, are we all working smart? And so with that being said, let's kind of jump into what all service organizations run into. And this is a private sector and public sector challenge because, at the end of the day, we're servicing the customer, even though they may have a different title. It may be a constituent versus a client or a customer. We're essentially, all trying to achieve the same thing. And so, as Paul Paul and I sat down and kind of came up with this presentation, we started to kind of compare challenges that we see in the private sector and public sector, and they often overlap quite often. And so we see on the private sector side, a CFO of an architecture engineering firm, they're worried about, changing business models, managing multiple industries or sectors, or even managing, the relationship with many communities. But they also have the same challenges that a community development director may have as, project execution, time and resource budgeting, performance management, managing those resources, time. You're going to hear us say that a lot, as time is very, very valuable. And so, there's kind of more of the overlap of what they see kind of all shifty in this trash can. But then what we also hear from, beyond the leader, we sit down with communities and we work with, senior leadership, or even up to brand new employees that have just joined the organization, maybe fresh out of college or from another community. They kind of say the same things, maybe differently, but they say the same things. Is they really want that 360-degree view. They want to better visualize and share visualizations with their team and leadership. They want, tools built to improve the task at hand, not track what I already do. So they want tools that are smarter than just, hey, I have these 10 tasks. I need to do 10 tasks today. They could do that on a tablet. They could do that on a piece of paper, on a cocktail napkin. And then a lot of times, I think the number one thing that we hear most often is they're tired of working in silos. They want collaboration and transparency within the organization, and that means breaking down walls between departments. And how do you do that? You essentially build a process that we're going to walk through today to really empower, visualization and between boards and senior leadership, whether it's city council or it's a board of directors of a private organization. Essentially, that leadership is looking for visualization of goals and objectives.
So one thing, Gary, I just wanted to add here before we moved on is, what we're also hearing from a lot of the leadership is that a lot of organizations that find themselves having difficulty in managing their business and managing their organizations is the fact that they're working in the business, not for the business. And so they're too down into the weeds. They're too concerned with processing things for their projects or their documentation or their operations or things of that nature without having the ability to take a step back and look at their business or their city or local government to really understand what's happening. Because once you start to pull back and then you start to look down on things from an analytical perspective and you start measuring against baselines against those activities, it really makes a big difference. One of the examples I always give to people was I was a controller for a very large size chemical company. And we used to use Dow back in the 80s and 90s as a baseline for key metrics for lost man time and all kinds of different metrics. And we would post those on our monthly review segments each month so that we had a baseline of what the top developing organizations were doing and then how we measured against that baseline. So now we know where we're at, we know where we need to get to, and we can start to trend to see whether we're improving towards those baselines or exceeding those baselines, or whether we're stagnant and flat and we need to make some changes. So it gives you a completely different perspective on your organization in terms of where you should be focusing your time and not. Go ahead, Gary.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, we have one customer, for example, that keeps those KPIs up on a television right there for all staff to see. How many days does it take to turn around sets of plans on average this year versus last year? They're essentially taking some of those metrics and KPIs that they implemented inside of GovSense and publishing them so everybody can see the transparency. I think that's super cool, and that's an idea that we got from Paul on the private sector side, seeing other companies do that as well. So before we slide into what we're focusing on today, we really want to just hit home the fact that whether this is directly or indirectly impacting you, all service organizations are based off of delivery, right? So if it's meeting deadlines, staffing team members on your team, tightly managing project schedules, hitting goals and targets, service organizations are focused on that. And I would even say on the public sector side, it's a little bit more demanding because they're fixed fee type relationships most of the time. And fixed fee type relationships in our society today, oftentimes, individuals jump to instant gratification. I've paid you my fee, I expect it immediately. Whereas, time-based billing or, billing hourly and things like that, they see, that return progressively that you're working on it. But, oftentimes you don't have that luxury on the public sector side because of fee schedules. So, it's like I've paid you, hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of dollars. I'm expecting a quick turnaround, but they don't know what's in your backlog. So, we're gonna jump into how do we overcome those challenges. So the first thing that we always really try to work with customers on is know your team, know your organization, monitor and measure. So identify your current state and build a target for a future state. And we're going to deep dive into each of these segments in a second. Step 2 of 3 is we need to define and deploy that process. So we're going to release the future state with goals and metrics that are transparent with the team first, next with leadership, and third with the public. And on the private sector side, I assume Paul would do 2 of the 3 same. So your team with leadership, and then with your customers directly. But on the public sector side, we need that additional level of transparency with everybody. And then finally, we need to template and baseline, as Paul mentioned earlier, baselining your challenges as a service organization, because we really need to have a systematic approach with known outcomes. And all of these seem like, I'm sure, it's like, oh my goodness, how are we going to do all this stuff? But if you break it down into smaller bite-sized pieces, which like we're about to do, our goal is essentially to get you through, how do we currently monitor and measure? How do we know what our organization is doing, what our team's doing, what each individual is doing? How do we build a plan to define and deploy and make sure everyone's, reading from the same standard operating procedures? And then how do we, build templates and baselines to measure the plan that we deployed, so that we can predict the future, so that we have templates, we have baselines, we know how a project is trending. If we compare, this PUD to this PUD at the same phase or at a third resubmittal, where are we in comparison? We have the data, we know the past. What is it going to tell us? Or working with a specific customer, what is that going to tell us based off of the history we have for them before? And so, as we, dive into this monitor and measure phase, the key here is really understanding where we are as an organization, good, bad, or indifferent. We have to understand where we are so we know where we're going. And we really preach this with our customers before, we even get into an engagement of, them possibly using GovSense of them. We hand them these tools and we say, you really need to understand where you are before we as consultants and as partners can understand where you are. And so, what we really try to focus on is, what services do you really offer? So not what the fee schedule says, what services do you really offer? And if you sit your team around a round table and you talk about your process, it's like your children possibly in elementary school playing telephone. I think you'll get 10 different answers to the same process that you probably have documented. And a lot of times we find that it's because, your team members are trying to exceed expectations. They're trying to go, further for the customer. They're trying to, work with them. But when you really dig deep down and you start to collect this data, you start to realize, for those services that we really offer, what do we charge for those services? And, on the private sector side, you'll hear communities often say, or business often say, we need to be profitable. We need to do this. And I can let Paul speak to this for a few minutes as well. But in the modern technology, just so, everyone's on the same page, and, if you don't follow technology trends, but in modern technology, when it comes to software as a service, businesses are looking at cost for services to essentially for them to cover the cost. They're not looking to make money on services because they know that the life of a customer as a software as a service will last a lot longer if that customer is successful. And I think the same thing happens in the public sector. Is essentially you're not there to be a profit center, but you're also not there to go into the red 2 months into the year, right? So how do we have that fair balance? And we really need to understand who, how, and when employees are delivering these services. So, who is doing it? When are they doing it? How are they delivering it? If they're driving out to the site to meet with, the architects and engineers every single meeting, is that a good use of time? Do we know that? And we're not trying to be Big Brother or overarching. We're just trying to come up with this consistent process. And then the other side, I think, is often overlooked when you're monitoring and measuring processes, is what's your customer's expectation? So what is your customer expecting from you? Are they expecting a quick turnaround time? Are they expecting a more detailed review? Are they expecting a more gauging experience? And you might hear different things from different people. As they say, I'd rather it take longer if I know I can expect, all of the outcomes that I'll need to do to resubmit plans or to move into phase 2 or do something like that. What's the communication cadence? What are your customers' expectations around when they should be notified, how they should be notified? Is text message suitable? Do they want phone calls every time? Your community, and as long as you set that expectation with them, they'll understand it. But if you leave it gray, then it often causes a challenge in transparency. Anything you would add here, Paul, to the monitor and measure phase?
No, I think the only thing that I would do from the customer's expectation, it's something that we're focusing on with our business internally is, just around that overall customer experience. So whether you're a local government or a private government, there's an old saying that says, people may not remember what you said, people may not remember what you did, but people will always remember how you made them feel. And I think that that's an important aspect that goes through any organization, whether it's a B2C or a B2B or a local government. So it's all about that customer experience and having people just feel absolutely wonderful about what it is that you're doing, how you're doing it, the expediency and the overall experience. And it's throughout your entire organization, not just one or two people, but from the time that the first contact or the first 1-800 number is dialed all the way through to plan is approved and all the different people that they came in contact with. I think that really holds a really valuable place in people's minds and their experience in working with you, especially in local government. If you've got a lot of GCs or builders that are building in your facility, it just makes life a whole lot easier for them and be willing to want to work with you and be much more flexible with you if that same in need is coming back to them. So I think it's an important aspect to keep in mind as well as you start to develop your own internal processes moving forward.
Yeah, that's something near and dear to your heart, Paul. Paul recently just built a house, and so he's been through those challenges kind of start to finish. But the key takeaway here is, all of these items have a cost. It may not be financial, but it could be an opportunity cost to be working on something else that may be a higher priority. So, all of these questions will essentially yield a net cost in some way, shape, or form. So, what do you do? So a lot of people ask us, okay, well, great. I mean, I think I understand that, but what do I need to do? And so we kind of focus on 4 key areas that you may or may not have heard of before. Mainly, the big thing is, how are people working, right? So what is our utilization rate? So per employee on a team basis, we need to be able to compare utilization. So that's tracking time versus the available amount of time to determine the bandwidth, right? So if I have, 250 hours to work, minus vacation, all that stuff, and I worked 270, I'm overutilized, right? And so the goal at the end is to try to get to that, being able to monitor that in real time or within a, few days, a week, a month. But at first we just need to track where are we today, right? Where are we today? Next is, our project budget versus actual. So like the actual variance between, the fees that you collected, and, what you have to work with versus the amount of time it's going to take you to do that. So again, we're not proposing that every single project needs to run in the black and be positive in a profit center. But we also, if we're going to recession-proof our organization, we need to have the data to go to council and plead our case for why our fee schedule hasn't changed in 15 years, needs to be adjusted to current dollar, right? And what that means. Next is project profitability. So again, we're not saying it's a profit center, but realistically, we need to take a look at revenue and costs and see where we are from that perspective, which kind of leads into our last one is, what are our resource requirements? So what do we require from our team to complete a project? And we're looking for bottlenecks, time and efficiencies, things like that. Typically that's ancillary departments or maybe third party type things that may be out of your control. But if we understand them, then we can shift, change, and predict them. So if we understand that, we need to submit plans to the state or to another governing body, maybe the county for cities and vice versa, they may take longer, but that's okay because we can reallocate. We can reallocate people to what they need to be working on based off of those predictable things. And so how do you get this from the customers? We're starting to see a lot of customers leverage our platform and other tools as simple as SurveyMonkey, free tools to just do online surveys. We have some examples. If afterwards you're interested in getting them, we can easily send them out to you. but we have, some online surveys that the customers have used to really understand, what customers are asking for from a planning and development perspective. We've seen customers do what we call like a top submitters form. So the top 5, 10 firms that may work with you or your department. We also see, working with non-for-profit or other organizations within the community, consulting firms. And then, of course, you can always call us. We're here to help. The next phase, or second of 3, is more of the define and deploy phase. And essentially, what we're looking to do is get buy-in from the team. So we understood what they're doing now, right? So we know where we've been. Now we need to define how we're going to get where we need to go. So, there's 2 aspects to this. First, we have to define our tools. We need consistent tools to focus on the future. And then we need to set our expectations because, again, we need to set the precedents and say, hey, as a team, we're really focused on standard operating procedures to predict the future and recession-proof our department. And to do that, or our organization, to do that, we need to track time so that as a leader in an organization, I can back into my total cost. So I know the labor cost, I know the time that's being spent. I take labor costs times the time, and that gives me a dollar amount. And if I start to see a trend where, we collected, $100 for this application, and it costs us $2,000 every single time it's submitted, I kind of have a problem. And I need to raise that issue internally and talk about how we either shorten the time period of reviewing or what services we're offering, or maybe increase the fees to do so. The next part is, we're going to require, from the team is to document detailed project notes in our template. We need to know if the time that we're tracking is a broken process or it's an outlier. It's a needy customer or something that a council member, an alderman, someone like county council member, really wanted us to focus on, or it got escalated, or the city or county manager escalated it. And so we really need to keep those notes and understand. And then the last part is we need to hold customers accountable. So, there's a fine line between, making sure that the customer is satisfied and then also making sure that they are held accountable on their part. So the example I always, say that sometimes gets laughs is, 5 resubmittals may not be acceptable. They may, but they may not be acceptable. And so, what are we looking for in our tools, right? So for us, we really try to tell people with this phase, you don't need fancy software at this phase. What you really need is a consistent process, and you also need the directive and buy-in from your team. And so the 3 must-need features you need for this process is something that's simple to deploy and share. A lot of times it's free, or it's already things that you have in your community, like Office 365 for your mail and Excel spreadsheets, all that stuff. It really needs just time and date functions and some notes and tracking all of that. I'll show you some examples that we've done. And then it needs to be, our perspective, why we say Office 365 and not just the Office suite is, as you heard many times, we're big believers in the cloud. We want to make sure that you can access the data from anywhere, because if users are going to adopt a process, you need to make it easy for them. A lot of times customers or prospects kind of get in the weeds on what they need right now, and they focus on the fancy, nice, amazing features during this phase. We call them the nice to haves, is like financial reporting and analytics. Most of that stuff you can do in Excel for this phase. Now, when we move into the templating phase, we're going to want to have more powerful tools, because we're going to want real-time analytics. We're going to do all this. But at this phase, we're really just trying to make sure our process works at a low cost, and get the team to buy in on your goal of recession-proofing your organization. And so a few examples here. It's just super simple, and we have these templates if y'all want to reach out to Paul or myself. Just realistically, and you can add columns, you can remove columns. It's just hand this out to everybody and say, this is a spreadsheet. To the left, I want your projects that you're working on, and then I need the date, the tasks that you worked on, the number of hours that you did. Now, this opportunity, this customer actually took planned versus actual hours. So they kind of took it a next step. They asked people to plan how many hours they thought it was going to take, and then document the actual hours it did take. That's, I think, a good step, but maybe everyone wouldn't be ready for that at first. So they can come in and track each of these here, and I renamed the projects to protect the guilty and the employee. The next is with that data. So we collect all this data, and we know the date here, right here. We know the time, and so that can turn into even a fancier report when we add in the labor costs of the employee, and we take a look at these projects, and we take a look at, you know, the variance. So are we actually seeing a net change in a negative fashion or a positive fashion of, you know, what we said was our budget and this is our actual. And again, these are templates you can use as well to just get started, just built in Excel or Google Sheets. And so those are kind of the high level ones there. The last phase, and I think it's the most important, but it will take time to get there, is your templating and baselining your projects. So the goal here is that we know where we've been, right? That was our first step. We know where we are because we've been rolling out our process with low cost or free tools or tools you already have. Now we need something to help us get where we're going and be able to provide data like no other department in your organization, like no other, you know, community around you, and showing, you know, hey, let's excel as an organization and start socializing our results. So if you remember, our first two questions from the first phase is, what services do we really offer, and what is our customer's expectation? So in this phase, we're going to implement something we call work breakdown structure, and we're going to be measuring time and resources based off of project templates, or, you know, you can template anything really, but, you know, we're going to use projects in this example. And then we're going to look at customer expectations. So how can that work breakdown structure provide transparency, regular communication cadence, because it's going to be built into our work breakdown structure, and our turnaround time for our customers, because we have that transparency and everybody knows what we're working on. So our end goal when we get to this phase in our templating and baselining to kind of recession-proof our department is we really need to exceed client expectations. So how do we do that? We have precise project estimates based off of the data we've collected, based off of the data that we know. We should now be able, within a rough estimate, to baseline a project. We're also going to be carefully balancing resources and managing what we call capacity planning. So, like, you know, do we have enough people to do this task at this time? And if we get this same project, because there's been hints of this new, you know, mixed-use development coming down the pike, will we be able to sustain that? And how would it impact our organization? And when you start doing these things, you'll start to see projects are delivered on time and on budget, and you'll start to see accurate and fair estimates. So understanding what that is, and we're starting to see customers that have had the data for a little while, and they've started to say, "Oh, man, this isn't looking good. We need to talk about this." And when they show up with data, when they show over years of data, and meet with senior leadership and county council and city council and things like that, everyone's like, "Oh, wow, yeah, this makes total sense." But if you walk up and say, "Hey, we need to increase fees by 10% because, you know, the building industry is, you know, increasing by 10% and the consumer price index has increased by 3% year over year," everyone's heads are going to look at you like you have three eyes. And so, you know, we think that providing this will really be transformational in nature for any organization. And what you'll start to find is you'll start to build out processes like these, where you start to, you know, develop swim lanes across the entire organization. Whereas before, most customers kind of stop right here. We took in an application and we got some money and we have a project and all of that. But now, you know, we have billing rules set up, we have work breakdown structure, you know, we have people voting time, and we have this full end-to-end process that involves not only, you know, from the public sector side, you know, the planning department and engineering, but now we're into project accounting and finance things, because you're really doing all the calculations that, you know, that software can do based off of the process that you implemented. And so, you know, what we start to see is we need to build these templates. So we need to build a structure. And in GovSense, I provided a few screenshots because we don't see this too often in the industry. A work breakdown structure is comprised of milestones, tasks and dependencies, responsible parties, hard and soft resources. That would be essentially, I know that someone in engineering needs to do this, so that would be a soft resource, as compared to Mary in engineering needs to do this, and that would be a hard resource. And then, planned entries, like I was showing you earlier, is planning the resources out so you can have a comparison. So, in GovSense, we allow you to build these work breakdown structures that build dependencies on tasks and when things should be done and how long they should take, the duration they should take versus estimated work versus actual work, and then the remaining work left, and to kind of give you that 360-degree view of any project. And then we need to define those baselines. So baselines, really summed up, are we need to know the projects that went really well, the projects that didn't go really well, and then anything else we want to slice and dice by. So projects of a specific type, projects in a certain district, things like that, projects that involved external participants. So you build out those baselines, and in GovSense, you can set them up and compare them to other projects of the same type. So then you can start to see trends like this here, where you have red and blue, and compare the baseline of what actually happened to what should have happened. And then, getting that whole view of, how you get there and your resources and what they're doing is, having tools that are bigger than Excel. So Excel is great, and that was great for our second phase, where we're deploying this new process. But, once we complete that, people are going to want more, and they're going to want real-time collaboration. And so you start to see resource allocation and being able to drag and drop people to projects, or having a dashboard that pretty much tells you things that are important, your KPIs that are important to your organization, all on one screen of a solution. So those things I think are really important. And then at the end of the day, you remember our 3 phases. The thing we really hope that you'll take home with you is, when you implement this process, not only are you working towards recession-proofing your organization, but you're making things easy. You start to work as a team. It's a friendly process. It's understood. There's a common goal. It's powerful. So now you're predictive. You're able to compare outcomes and have real-time metrics and KPIs. And it's fast. So you can get it at the turn of a dime. You can do what if scenarios. What if something changes? What if we get this? What if this happens? You can implement those, easy, powerful, and fast when you start to go with a 3-step process of monitoring and measuring, deploying, and then templating each of your solutions. So with that being said, I know we're coming up here with about 7 minutes left. I was hoping to leave it to everybody. If there's any questions, I think Sarah's going to be our moderator on that. If anyone has any questions, feel free to ask. We also threw up our email addresses and phone numbers. If anyone would like to reach out here, we're more than happy to share those templates with you, or have further conversations. I'm happy to do so.
All right, thank you, Paul and Gary. I'll give everyone a couple of minutes if they have any questions. But I guess while we're waiting, everyone that's still here, remember to check your emails. Following the webinar, I'll send an email out with CM information and with information about next month's webinar. Visit apavirginia.com for information on all of our upcoming events and webinars. And this webinar will be on our YouTube channel within 24 hours, so feel free to watch it again or use it as a future resource. Share it with your colleagues. If anyone's interested in presenting in the series, you can contact myself, Sarah Pentecost, and my email is on our website on the webinar page. And don't see any questions coming in. Let's see. Oh, that's not a question. Okay. Do you all have any FAQs that you usually get during these kinds of presentations or when you're speaking to people? Any last words?
I mean, we typically, this type of presentation's evolved a lot over time. We've written about it a few times for ELGL and a few other organizations. So it is evolving from what we learn too. I mean, we learn new things from each of our customers and experiences. But I guess kind of my closing thing is I just really want to thank everybody for their time. I know it's often a challenge to spend time at lunch doing this, but I really appreciate it.
Yeah, likewise. Absolutely. Thanks everybody for your time today. Really appreciate it. And then we hope that you guys found it very informative. And it's like everything else, I think, you may not have questions now, but reach out to Sarah. And again, our information is there. So if you want to reach out to us or ask us questions or set up a call afterwards, we'd be delighted to have further conversation with you.
Absolutely. And I will include their emails on the follow-up email to all of you attendees. And
terrific.
Yeah, I think that's it. So I guess everyone is super informed today. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you again, Gary and Paul, for taking time out of your day to present with us. We'd love to have you back. And I hope everyone has a great rest of your Monday.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you. Take care.